And we're joined here today with Nick Kovacevich. You are the CEO of KushCo Holdings. Thank you for taking the time today. How are you today, my good man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, your company, for many people who don't know, has been around for quite some time. That's not something you can always say in the cannabis world. But for investors who may not have heard you before, and it being your first time on our platform, can you let us know a little bit more about who you are and what it is that your company does?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been around since 2010, which I guess makes us a dinosaur in this legal cannabis industry, right? We started in California at the time, providing packaging for medical cannabis dispensaries. We've evolved our offering. We've moved into new markets, and in fact, with the legalization in Canada, happening for adult use last year, we opened our first presence in Canada as well. So we have an office in Toronto and a team in Canada servicing the LPs. Right now, we're focused on major recreational markets, markets like California, which is our home state and our biggest sales market, legacy markets like Colorado and Washington and Oregon, newer markets like Nevada and now Massachusetts, where we have physical presence in all of those states and more. We're selling not just packaging, but we're also selling vape hardware. We're selling items like butane gas and ethanol. These are solvents that are used in the extraction process. We're also selling natural products that are flavor agents and terpenes that they can blend with these oils. And we're selling basic supplies like paper cones and gloves. So we have a wide array of products that we offer. We liken ourselves to the picks and shovels provider of the green rush. And we're, excited to be a partner with a lot of these exciting growing companies, whether it's Canadian LPs, multi-state operators here in the U.S., or just smaller regional brand local level. In total, we've serviced over 6,000 businesses this year alone. And we have one of the largest sales forces that are out there. It's over 50 people in the field developing and nurturing these relationships.
Yeah. And like you said, funny enough, 2010 is dinosaur years when you come to in the cannabis space. Many people don't get past 3 or 4 years. But I found it really interesting when I first heard about your company because it was strongly ancillary products and still is, but it's the array of different products and what we all knew that we were going through a cannabis rush and people needed to get these certain supplies from providers, and there really wasn't that many options out there to turn to, and especially not people who specialize in it as well. So I always knew that this area of cannabis would be a really great opportunity for people to not only have a business in, like obviously that but to invest in as well, because there aren't many players doing it on a very large scale. I believe you're the largest scale, actually. If I'm looking at your last quarterly results, this came out relatively recently, record-breaking quarter of $35.2 million. I believe that's in USD as well, for anybody who's looking for that conversion. Up 239% year over year. Those are fantastic numbers for an ancillary product and for someone who doesn't necessarily touch the plant, but touches all the other aspects of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting. We've been able to essentially outgrow a lot of these businesses that are directly touching the plant, even though they have more protections in their market in terms of the limited nature of licenses. And these are obviously our customers, so it's a friendly competition. But we obviously are aggressive. We want to grow our sales. We know these guys are growing at tremendous rates, and just the ability to keep up is fantastic. But one of the ways we've been able to do it is, there's an interesting dynamic here in the U.S. where and that makes it extremely difficult for the plant touching businesses to scale their operations, because they essentially have to set up individual production facilities in every single state that they intend to operate. That's obviously very capital intensive. It's very time intensive as well. And it doesn't allow for those efficiencies and those economies of scale that you see the Canadian LPs getting, where they're able to put 1 million square feet in one province and then essentially ship that product throughout the whole country and export it globally. The businesses here in the U.S. don't have that advantage. They're confined to the state. They produce in that state and they sell in that state only. And so we don't have that problem because we're ancillary. So as an ancillary business, we can ship our products across state lines, country lines. We can ship globally. And none of our products contain THC or CBD, so there's no regulatory red tape that we deal with. We have certain regulations around compliance for how things are packaged and labeled, and we have to understand those different and build a product portfolio around it. But essentially, these products are just normal hard goods, and we can scale our business like any other normal business would, other than the stigma that we face with being associated with the cannabis industry and some of the issues on the regulatory front in terms of finance and banking and fundraising and listing on major exchanges, all headwinds. But other than that, at its core, our business is very similar to a traditional business, and we've been able to show that we can scale at much faster rates because of those dynamics, which is interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've always wondered, well, I don't wonder, I understand why there's a lot of lobbying against cannabis and all of that, but the banking situation in the States is still awful ever since the Cole memo was rescinded. I can only imagine that they are going to be, I believe it was the Safe Banking Act, I believe it was called. I don't know I don't follow U.S. politics as much as I wish I did, but I don't know how far that is in that sense. But that's needed because so many people have such hard access to capital, and it's crippling a lot of these companies. They're operating in all cash. That's not safe. That's actually ridiculous. But on that note, though, the reason why I'm going on a little bit of a digression with this is because it actually goes right into a point I wanted to cover, and that was that recently announcing the private placement of $21.3 million US senior unsecured note. I believe it's saying, if I'm reading this correctly, it's going to one institutional investor. Is that correct, or am I misreading that?
No, you're spot on, and it's again highlighting the difference between the U.S. and Canada. Canada, a nation with the federal law in effect, has brought traditional banks into the space and traditional types of financing, and we just have not had that here in the U.S. We're starting to see that evolve, and I think that debt piece that we just secured is a prime of how things are developing here in the U.S. So that was the first true debt piece that's unsecured, and that is again one lender, and the interest rate all in, if we keep that debt in place through the life of the 18-month term, ends up being somewhere around 13%, which it's not LIBOR plus 1 or 2 like traditional businesses might get, but it's certainly a far cry from where the industry's been, which is really in predatory lending levels, in the high teens, low 20s. Stuff that has equity kickers attached to it, warrants. This is a fairly clean, unsecured debt piece, and I think it's a landmark milestone, not only for our company, but for the entire industry here in the evolving and the terms improving on some of these financings. It's a step in the right direction, and something like the Safe Banking Act, like you mentioned, will be a bigger catalyst to bring more of the traditional lending and financial institutions into the marketplace and start to level the playing field. That's been the big difference between companies in Canada that have had major access to capital and been able to list on the major exchanges, even here in the US. Companies in Canada are able to list on NASDAQ and NYSE, whereas companies in the US are forced to actually list up in Canada on the Canadian Securities Exchange. So it's a very interesting dynamic, and I think we're seeing progression at all levels, but it is going to take some sort of change agent at the legislative federal level, something like the Safe Banking Act or the States Act, to see that change fully go into effect. And I think we're a ways out from that, although we're seeing continued progress, as I mentioned.
Yeah, and I'm sure it'll come. I mean, I've said it for the longest time, whether people hate or love Trump, won't go into that conversation while we're going right now, but nonetheless, there is no way a Trump government who's looking at things in China, everyone's talking about trades and tariffs, all these different things, but behind all of that, look at the cannabis industry. Look at how much money is coming into some of these states and just cities as well, in taxes, in the money you don't have to spend in law enforcement going after someone because they have a gram on them. These petty crimes that people are doing a lot of time, years of their life for that. And it's amazing what's going on. I can't see the government going that much longer, saying, wait a second, we're going to let Canada expand. We're going to let all these other countries catch up to us. Why would they do that when you could say, why don't we make this federal? We'll still be strict on it, whatever, it doesn't matter, but we'll make it federally legal to go with the states. And if the states decide they want it, they can have it. But now you're tapping into that tax revenue. You're getting your banks back in it. You're keeping capital in your country. I can only imagine anyone from the political side would want that to happen. So I think it's a matter of when, obviously, than if. But I can imagine it's going to happen a little bit sooner than some people think it is, because there's way too many catalysts to stop that from happening.
No, look, you hit the nail on the head, and I think it's interesting what's playing out right now. What we're seeing is support at an all-time high, so the public wants it, and of course that then trickles down to the elected representatives, and so we're seeing actual support at the federal level, whether it's Congress, which is Democrat controlled, or whether it's Senate, which is Republican controlled. I think there's a path on either side. There's bipartisan support now for this issue because on one hand, you have the social justice component, and you have, the decriminalization and what that does for the legal system, all the points you mentioned. On the other hand, you have the tax revenue and what it does fiscally for the economy. And so you can appeal to both sides. And I think there, but what we're seeing is, really politics getting in the way. So you have something like the States Act, which had bipartisan support and a great cast of folks that were behind it on both sides of the aisle. And it was gaining traction, looking like it was going to pass in the earlier part of this year. And then you have folks that are, Democrats that are liberal, that obviously support legalization, but now they're jumping ship and they're going to something like the Marijuana Justice Act, which was sponsored by Cory Booker, that's more progressive, and it has, provisions for social equity, and they want minority groups to be able to have equity in this industry, and they want expungement and all this great stuff. But the reality is you're now taking it so far to one extreme that you're now losing that bipartisan support. And so something like that Marijuana Justice Act, which is certainly a great bill, it's unlikely to get traction because it doesn't appeal to both sides. So in one sense, there's both sides, but there's not a cohesive strategy on pushing forward an initiative that we know will pass. And that may ultimately delay this thing further than most people think, just because people can't come to their senses in terms of how to get a piece of initiative that can gain traction on both sides, how to get that across the finish line. I think that's going to be the key to really getting something done here.
Yeah, and absolutely. And you see it everywhere in politics. So they're trying to pass something, and they just make these omnibus bills where it's just, there's so much connected to it. So you might say, hey, I love those 155 things, but I don't like those 27 things. And,
yes.
And instead of, like you said, I think Canada did that with Bill C-45, where look at edibles. Edibles never made its way through. Look at vapes. They never made its way through. We went really, really strict on some things. I think we need to pull back, because they treat it like tobacco instead of like alcohol. But they knew that they needed to get it through, and they knew that the conservatives really were fighting against this, even though they said they weren't. They were. So I think we pulled back a lot of different things and said, you know what? It'll go through, and then a year from now, which is going to come up in October coming up, we'll revisit those things you wanted in the first bill. I think that was a smart decision to make, because at the end of the day, get it through. Get it federal. I got a lot of quarrels with how what was left out and some of the things that were put in, but you know what? It's through. It's there. Now you can build off of that. It's a lot easier to add things on, I think, as the politics or a political view, I should say, to add things on later than go, oh no, we screwed up, and trying to take it out. I think that's what they were worried about. But
I totally agree with you, and I think that's it's going to take some time, right? And I think the important thing is. And, I've been an advocate of that here in the States, where people have said, hey, I don't like the way this bill's written for this state or that. And I said, look, we got to pass the states. They got to pass, because that's our ultimate catalyst to get the federal government behind it. If the more states that come online, the more pressure that puts on the federal government to make changes. And you might not like a certain thing about a bill, everybody's going to have their qualms. But if you're not pushing forward, then you're essentially going backward. And so I totally agree with you. And I think, we can certainly commend Canada. Of course, people are going to complain about, how restrictive this is, or the fact that they only allow these products and not those products, but, and certainly we can all debate that, but the important thing is they got it done, and they're going to continue to progress it along the way. We have another, huge catalyst for the industry coming here in October when they allow vape pens and edibles, hopefully on October 17th.
Yeah, absolutely. Last point of talk before I let you go. I know you got a really busy day here, but last point and kind of going on, speaking about political movement in Health Canada and what they did. One of the big issues a lot of people had, this is for people who were massive cannabis enthusiasts and people who maybe don't like cannabis at all. A lot of them had issue with the packaging. There is so much packaging, and a lot of these things are sold by grams. So you'll gram, and each one has its own package. You get quarters and things like that, but the amount of plastic that are in each one of these is actually, like, I was shocked when I first saw it, and it's thrown a lot of people off. So now a lot of people and a lot of LPs are looking for a different way of doing this, whether it be it's biodegradable, whether it's reusable. I've seen some people doing glass jars and just trying to find ways that address that situation. I bring this up because the other point I want to talk about, and one I think caught my attention the most before we began our interview, was your manufacturing and distribution agreement with Sungrown Packaging to launch biodegradable packaging and their portfolio of those different products. That's got to have some interest in Canada, I can imagine, because everyone knows that's an issue right now. Way too much plastic. If you can go biodegradable, I think you've hit a lot of people's concerns. Can you talk a little bit more about that initiative?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great great topic to discuss. I think it's front and center with consumers, and because of the awareness and the consumer demand, it's become a big topic for producers, for LPs. And we're actually, again, I have to commend Canada for really leading the charge here. These Canadian LPs have been very aggressive in approaching us and looking for these solutions. And, we're also based in California. And so, California's typically been one of the most progressive states when it comes to environmental initiatives. And so we're seeing an increased demand from the brands that we represent here. We have some with Canadian LPs to transform the current forms of packaging that they're using from something that's hurting the environment, that is maybe plastic based, into something that's completely biodegradable and compostable, and something that's good for the environment. And so it's great to see private enterprise leading the charge here. It's great to see consumers putting the pressure for change. And I think it's ultimately, you need all of that to actually see some of this change. Now, we're not dumb. We know it's coming. We know, number one, it's the right thing to do. But number two, it's something that is going to be demanded of us from our client base. So it's the right thing for our business as well. And we announced this great partnership with Sungrown, who has a proprietary child-resistant box that's completely biodegradable and compostable and can fit many different form factors. So we're in the market with that today. We also recently announced a partnership with iEcho, who's one of the leading formulators for with hemp. They're working with PLA. They're working with a bunch of different substrates and basically creating new formulas that are, flexible and malleable and can be put into different molding tools that can produce items. And we're seeing phenomenal success there. We should have our first products launching here in the coming months from that partnership as well. So our overall thesis and goal is, how do we create at least one or two biodegradable, compostable, eco-friendly options for all of the different types of form factors that need to be packaged. And it's no easy task, but we have to start somewhere. And certainly Sungrown partnership is a great starting place. The partnership with iEcho will expand upon that. And we're a member of sustainable coalitions here in the U.S. With some of the biggest companies in the country, including companies like Coca-Cola that are members of this group. And we want to play a leading. It's part of our company and also the vision for the cannabis industry, which has always been a green, environmentally friendly industry, and is now caught in this dilemma where we're moving into a regulated industry, and a lot of that regulation ends up putting burdens on packaging that creates waste. And so we need to be part of the solution and solving that and moving this industry into the next generation of packaging design, which is going to be eco-friendly and good for the environment. And we're very pleased to play that leading role and to be able to provide these solutions for some of the premier companies in the space that are now coming to us and seeking them.
Yeah, well said, well said. And we appreciate the initiative. I got a good friend of mine as well. All the stuff he does in photography and videography is all in the cannabis space, and his biggest thing is having a good ethical image and looking for things and giving back. I think a lot of people actually, I think it's a huge movement, whether you're a millennial, whether your business is, whether it's a corporation, a lot of people are recognizing that there is this corporate responsibility that unfortunately back in the, the 60s, 70s, and 80s when plastic started taking over, we weren't really thinking that whatsoever. And now we're at quite truly an epidemic. I don't care if you think of climate change, if it's happening or not, that's not even about that. It's just the fact that plastic is everywhere. It's not going anywhere for at least 100 years or more. So let's stop that. Let's find different ways around it. And I think, going into more packaging that has multiple uses or that can biodegrade is something that's going to take us by storm. I'm hoping so. Fingers crossed. And it's nice to see that you are doing that with your company, and looking forward to hearing about other products that are coming out in the near future as well in that regards, but also just having you on the show again in the near future. We love having companies on, finding out the progression, what's been happening lately. So you're more than welcome to come on when you've got some more news and looking to give some investors a little bit more information about what it is that you've been up to.
Absolutely. And, obviously as a publicly traded company, we have a lot of information available on our investor relations website, which is KushCo.com. And, you guys have been following the company. I appreciate you having me on. I'm happy to come on anytime. And, we're going to continue to execute here. We're going to continue to look at new initiatives. And there's always exciting things happening. As I'm sure you know, this industry is moving very fast. And we want to continue to update the listeners and always have the most available information about what's happening with KushCo, but also what's happening with the industry. And I think we have a great lens on that because we service so many of these markets, including, countries like Canada and markets like, we're happy to share that insight wherever your listeners see fit.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Nick. I appreciate it very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. And like I said earlier, we look forward to having you on in the near future as well. Take care.